You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality, not that it is any real mystery.
Hi, I'm Kevin Bulmer. Thank you for being here. I hope the day's treating you well. With No Schedule Man, I like to say that the journey is the destination. That's really what No Schedule Man is all about. It's about the journey, and so I'm not saying that I have all the answers. What I'm saying is that I'm actively looking for at least the clues along the way, and I'd love to have some company, and you can do that and make sure to stay in touch by jumping on board my email list at noscheduleman.com/email VIP, and we can keep in touch that way along this journey of life, of personal development, of self-improvement, of asking the questions and then waiting for the answers, some of which never come. And I'm going to ask a question today, but first I'll shape up how this particular episode came about. So as for this journey, where I am at this point in mine, you might be able to tell by the sound of my voice if you've listened to any of our other episodes that I'm not feeling at my best today. In fact, it's been over a year since I felt as rough as I do right now. And I think there are a number of things that are contributing to that. Yet I'm still very frustrated about that because I feel like I've been trying to do a lot of things proactively to keep this from happening. As far as doing a podcast is concerned, there's a bit of an irony in slogging through this. I went through this a lot on my radio days where you would show up. Basically, you could be on the air on the radio through just about anything, except for if you lost your voice. And there would be times when I would go and I'd show up on the air and I would sort of struggle through it, and I didn't really realize that people didn't want to turn on the radio and hear somebody that couldn't talk. It wasn't very pleasurable or enjoyable to them. But I guess that goes to my point, is that we want to soldier on. And sometimes we don't want to accept the clues and the messages that we're clearly being shown by life, by the universe, by our own bodies, that we need to maybe be doing something different than what we're doing. So I could argue that I should not be doing this podcast at all, because I'm sitting at my desk at about 8:30 in the evening that I'm recording this, and I had a guest lined up who was going to join me for this episode and was really looking forward to that conversation, and got late into the afternoon today and got a note from him that he was down for the count, wasn't feeling well, and was going to need to reschedule. And then my next guest, I'll be meeting from the time that I'm recording this, I'll be meeting her tomorrow, but we'll save that conversation for another week or so before we release that. And so I thought about, well, because my immediate reaction, and I'm just going to be honest, my immediate reaction when I got the note from the guest that sent a note to me today and said, "I'm sorry, Kevin, I've got to reschedule," the first thing I thought was, oh, good. Now I can just go home tonight and relax. But then the very next thing that I thought was, okay, I've got to come up with a subject to create another episode, knowing full well that at this point in the development of this podcast, full disclosure, and I know what the situation is, I'm really the only one who that's going to matter to. Nothing would shift in the world. Nobody would be ultimately disappointed, I don't think. I'd love to think that they would, but not that I want to disappoint people, but at this point, nobody would really have their life disrupted too much if there was not an episode of the No Schedule Man podcast this week. But who it matters to is to me. And I think, again, that plays into the irony of the subject line of this podcast, which is when life calls time out. And my question to you is, how do you know when that's happening to you? And I'll frame the context about what I mean by timeout in just a moment. But how do you know that's what's going on, when it's going on, and what do you do about it? Or more specifically, what do you not do about it? Because I think if you're a goal-oriented person, like I am, you set out some expectation for yourself, and you do your best to try to Give yourself a command and then follow it and set a goal and work to achieve it and then keep moving forward. Because whenever you make an excuse for yourself and then you just let something go, even if it's just a commitment that you've made to yourself, you let that go once, it's easier to let it go a second time and a third time. This is, I guess, a form of habit where we all build good habits and all of us have not as good habits. I don't like falling out of the habit of not going to the gym, for instance. And it's tough when I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling now, which is not very well, where I struggle with thinking, okay, well, I should probably rest and let my body's energy go toward fighting whatever kind of a illness that I've got. But on the other hand, I want to keep moving. I want my blood circulating. I want to be able to sweat out whatever I can of whatever's going on. I want the psychological benefits of going to the fitness center and seeing some of my friends and being around that positive energy. So how do you choose? Because sometimes life is saying, hey, man, hey, dummy. At least that's how it talks to me. Slow down. Time out. Let me give you a little bit more context here to this. One of my favorite books ever is a book called Conscious Living by Gay Hendricks. I owe so much of my personal development and the improvement in my life, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, to that book and to Gay Hendricks specifically. Conscious Living, if you want to look it up, and it's on my books page under resources at noscheduleman.com. There's a quote from the book. It's on page 85 of the copy that I have. And this is what Gay Hendricks says. Quote, 20,000 therapy sessions during the past 30 years have taught me something I now believe in my bones. We choose how gently we get our lessons by how open we are to learning. Life teaches us with a sledgehammer if we refuse to pay attention. It administers the same lesson with a feather tickle if we show a willingness to learn. That's from Conscious Living by Gay Hendricks, and I tell more of that story in my keynote speech, Rise Like a Phoenix, Race Like a Turtle. But if we refuse to pay attention, life will teach us with a sledgehammer. Or, if we're kind of tuned in to who we are and to the way that the flow is going, then we'll just get those little messages, the feather tickle that he talks about here and there. Hey, you might want to adjust this. You might want to pull back on that. You might want to go a little bit harder here. So what I'm talking about, I think, in this episode is somewhere between the hammer and the feather. Sometimes, you get the tickle of the feather, and maybe you wake up in the morning. We've all had these days where you just don't really feel like getting going. Or that task that you really just aren't all that enthusiastic about going and doing. I'm not talking about that so much, about the times when we just need to kind of give ourselves a little bit of a kick in the proverbial behind. I'm also not talking about the hammer. And I don't know anybody that hasn't had life hammer them over the head a few times. I certainly have. One of the key examples of that was the time when I was actually putting the No Schedule Man CD together. Gosh, time is flying. This was back in 2010 I released that CD. So the whole idea of No Schedule Man, no plan is all part of the plan, and embracing change and letting go and going with the flow, it was years after I wrote that song and created that CD and released it before I really understood what I was saying, in a song that I had written. And more than that, before I was ready to actually understand and apply that in my own life. So in other words, when I was trying to produce, create, perform, and release the song and the idea of No Schedule Man, going with the flow, being mindful, and I'll get there when I get there, if I get there at all, I was the exact opposite of that whole idea. I was like a bull in a china shop. In fact, my buddy Kevin Gorman and he and I worked together on creating that CD in little sessions of a couple hours here and there over the course of almost a year and a half. We chipped away at that. And when we got in the sight of the finish line, I was so determined that we would have a deadline to work toward. And in this case, it was a date for the concert for the CD release. And let me tell you, I had so many grand plans. I had this great, complicated, custom-designed merchandise display. And I had T-shirts made up, and hats, and magnets, and notepads, a lot of which are still kicking around in bins in the basement, by the way. But all of these elaborate plans on everything that was going to happen after all of this was rolled out. And the lyric in the song says, "No plan is all part of the plan. I'll get there when I get there, if I get there at all." But the way that I was acting was, no, we're going to set this deadline, and it's going to arrive on this date, and then when it gets here, this is going to happen, which is going to trigger that, and then the next thing will happen, and on and on and on. So that was going to be going into, if I remember right, the 12th of June, 2010, on or around that date. And then I had a number of dates all through that summer planned out. Excuse me, there goes the voice cracking. See, I shouldn't even be doing this. I'm doing it again. A whole bunch of dates planned out and scheduled where we were going to go and perform the music to promote the CD and all that kind of stuff. So it was all well laid out, a great path to follow. And I thought I had it all figured out. But the funny thing happened was I got sick. My back got really, really bad, which turned out to be, we didn't know this at the time, but it turned out to be 3 herniated discs in my lower back, which really was one bad herniated disc at the very bottom of my spine. And then I guess when that happens, it's fairly common for the next two to kind of be thrown out of alignment. But 3 herniated discs, that sounds dramatic, and that strokes my ego. So I had 3 herniated discs in my lower back. And so the lowest one was pinching off the sciatic nerve on the left part of my butt cheek and then down my left leg. I can see now that I did that to myself by just the tension that I had gathered through my shoulders and neck and everything else over the years, and the stress and the anxiety that I gathered up that I didn't really know how to deal with. So life had been hammering me for a long time, and I wasn't getting those signs. I just thought I should soldier through it. Well, then did I stop when my back got so bad, when I was at that time in my mid-30s, and I was hobbling around with a Yoda cane, couldn't even stand up straight. That would have been the logical thing to do. That's not what I did. So I kept soldiering on because, again, I had a deadline. I had a plan. I had everything all set out. I knew what the result was going to be. And I felt like I was pursuing something that spoke to my passions and my creativity and that I always wanted to do. And now was the time that I'm supposed to be doing this. So why in the world is this happening to me, that all of a sudden I'm not feeling well and my back is so bad and I can't walk without a cane? Well, what happened by not listening to my body and slowing down and just putting all that stuff on the back burner for a little while was I got even worse. The pain was so bad, and you'll know this if you've ever had troubles with your back. I don't wish that on anyone. But the pain was so bad that I really couldn't sleep more nights than not. I remember it got so dire that toward the end of the day, I'd start to become really depressed because I would think everybody else is going to sleep and I'm not going to be able to. And as those days and nights piled up and turned into weeks and turned into months, and I wasn't getting enough sleep, and I was trying to work through the pain, and I was trying to do this CD on my own time, and I thought I was being noble by that, but eventually my whole system crashed and I landed in the hospital. And I remember they took one look at me and they thought, at first they thought I had meningitis because of how bad my back hurt, and that hadn't been diagnosed properly yet. And I had a horrible infection, which turned out to be some strain of strep. It took, I think, 3 rounds of antibiotics months later before they figured out what that actually was. But the point for this conversation is I ended up in the hospital. And as I was in the hospital, where I stayed for almost a full week, it became evident to me that I was not going to be able to release the CD on the date that I had originally intended. And although I had a whole list of RSVPs and a whole room full of people at the venue that I had booked ready to go for that date, which I think was June 12th, somewhere around there, middle of June that year of 2010, I knew I was going to have to reschedule it. Now, looking back, I'm almost ashamed to tell you the truth, but there's no benefit, I think, to you or to me by making anything up, so I'll just be open and authentic about it. The obvious thing to do would have been to call a halt to all of that. And maybe everything else as well, because I haven't even talked about, my regular job that I was doing at the time and being a dad and a husband at the time. This was before my divorce. Wasn't long after that the separation started. No wonder she wanted to be rid of me. In any event, the smart thing to do would have been to stop. Because life was not only calling for a time out, life was saying, no, let's rein this whole game out. Let's stop the season. Let's call a lockout. I didn't get the message. I thought that what I was supposed to do was keep soldiering on. I did reschedule that CD release date for the No Schedule Man CD for 2 weeks later. What an idiot. Yeah, I'm talking about myself now. But I'm offering this up in case you can think back on some of your own experiences and perhaps relate. I look back at this now and I just absolutely shake my head. But yeah, I was in the hospital and making calls and sending emails to reschedule this CD release concert for 2 weeks later. We did the show. I remember that date for certain. It was June 26, 2010. There is video of that. There are a few songs that were captured on video that are on my YouTube channel at youtube.com/noscheduleman if you want to see. I'm sitting on a stool in that concert because I couldn't stand up. My back and my legs still hurt so badly that I couldn't stand up to play guitar. So what was I doing releasing the CD? I wonder how many people that were there that night clapped politely, and I'm sure because it was a lot of friends and family were happy for me and proud of me, but I wonder how many of them were also thinking, what a dummy. What's he doing? Why doesn't he just wait until he's ready and then we'll come out then? I've never asked any of those people, but I'm starting to wonder that now. I hobbled up onto the stage with the help of that cane. And so that was a time when life was absolutely sledgehammering me across the face, and I did not get the message. And I could continue that story and tell you what happens from there and well on down the road, but I'll stop. Suffice it to say, for the purposes of this conversation, it's not those times so much where life is just dealing you sledgehammer blows. In that particular instance, I did that to myself. Sometimes life hands people things much more dire that are not necessarily of their own doing. An illness, a significant loss, an accident, a job loss. These things happen, and they're part of the journey, and then it becomes our responsibility in terms of how we're going to deal with those. So to haul me back and haul us back to where I was a few minutes ago, what I'm talking about today is, and I'm really interested in your thoughts about this, the times in the in-between, like the Gay Hendricks quote, that life will teach us with a sledgehammer, or it'll administer the same lessons with a feather tickle. Between the feather and the sledgehammer, how do you know when it's a little bit more than, I just don't feel like it, or I'm just a little bit overtired, to where it's, you know what, I need to take a bit of a break. It's when that same voice, to use a boxing analogy, that usually says, get back up. When you feel like you've been knocked to the mat and the voice says, okay, that was a good blow, get up. Get back up. Let's keep going. That voice that a lot of us have when we're resilient, when we're goal-driven, when that voice says, yeah, you might want to stay down here for a few beats. When is that for you? How do you know when it's time for a bit of a timeout? And what do you do about that? See, when I'm starting to sense it now, when I think it's a little bit more than just some sniffles or I didn't get enough sleep last night, I do a little bit of a checklist, and then I have all these different tricks that I'll try to see if I can kind of get myself back into the flow and engage in the rhythm. And one of them is to just sit still for a bit. A little bit of extra meditation or reflection, or get out a journal and even write down, maybe even ask the question, what's really going on here? What am I feeling? And you can go to people that certainly know a lot more than I do in terms of meditation and internalizing that and asking yourself and your spirit and your body the questions of, how am I feeling? Where might this be coming from? That's one trick that you can try. I already mentioned I like going back to the gym. If I miss even a few days, I find that I lose a lot of my momentum, and I also find that it affects the way that I feel mentally and emotionally. I feel better when I go there. I'm not a fitness freak, if I could use that term. I just like going and exercising and keeping my blood moving, and I find it keeps my energy high, and I enjoy seeing other people when I go there. When I go there and that doesn't work and I still feel deflated, then I think, okay, it might be time for a timeout. Or visiting with friends, or allowing yourself a little bit of a slothful sleep-in day or something like that. When you've gone through that whole checklist of stuff, you eat soup for lunch and dinner for 2 or 3 straight days and you still have a little bit of a hoarse voice. And you think, maybe it's time for a bit of a timeout here. How do you know that? What do you do about it, and how do you allow yourself to get back into the flow? Let me know in the comments section with this blog post. It's episode 35 at noscheduleman.com, or this episode, as all of them are, is posted on the YouTube feed at youtube.com/noscheduleman, and you can comment there easily as well. I would love to hear from you, and I'm thinking that everybody can probably relate to this on some level. We're not being lazy, and we haven't had a major catastrophe in our life, but we just know our bodies are telling us, slow down, stay on the mat for a bit, time out. What do you do about that? For me, I take, 20 minutes and make another podcast so that I can stay on track to meet my goal of getting 52 of them out this year. I know I'm the only one that really matters to, but it does matter to me, and at least we've created this one, and it gives me a chance to still meet that goal. So let me know what you think, and hopefully we can get some conversation going to help some other people on that subject. Meantime, you can reach me at kevinbulmer.com. noscheduleman.com takes you to the same place. All my social channel links are up there, as is the email VIP list sign up. You can find all of that in the upper right-hand corner at noscheduleman.com. I hope you'll join me on this journey and add your voice to mine. Thank you so much for choosing to spend some time with me today. I hope you'll join me next week on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.